KT McFarland, former Trump Deputy National Security Advisor, also board member of the American Conservative Union. KT, great to see you as always. Okay, so President Trump has spent some time on the phone in these past few days, lengthy conversations with both Putin and Zelenskyy here. What are the next steps in making these ceasefire proposals a reality?
Well, there'll be a lot of give and take and a lot of horse trading. You know, what Zelenskyy has said is we want to stay in Kursk, this one region that's that the Ukrainians have taken from Russia. The Russians have said, well, we don't want any NATO membership for Ukraine. We don't want British or French troops stationed on the Ukrainian-Russian border. So there are a lot of issues to be worked out. But I think the main issue of do you want a deal or not? Do you want to go to the negotiating table or not? I think that's already been decided. And that's been reinforced by both phone calls with President Trump and Putin and Trump and Zelenskyy. So the next stages are going to be horse trading, and that's going to go on probably in the Middle East, where the envoys and the Secretary of State and the national security advisors will meet with Russian and Ukrainian and probably even European counterparts to thrash out the final details.
You mentioned the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. They put out a joint statement on the White House website, and we can read some of that in part. It says, quote, President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Did you have a thought on that, on owning some of these power plants or this energy infrastructure by America? And if so, does that get a little sticky in terms of the defense of NATO?
Yeah, Sean, this is, I think, the genius of President Trump's proposal. You know, Trump has said, look, we're not going to have American forces on the ground. We are not going to fight Russia. We are not going to get in World War III. But what he said is that we will protect Ukraine in other ways. And that's with a rare earth minerals deal, a minerals deal where the United States helps Ukraine develop its resources. And now he said maybe America can come in, and particularly with the nuclear plants, which are the scary ones if something goes wrong, that the United States could come and either own them, and then it would be American security. But think about what that means going for the next 20 or 30 years. That means that the United States would have an economic, a personal economic stake, a national stake in Ukraine's economy and Ukraine's peace and prosperity. That, to me, is a far better guarantee for Ukraine's security going forward, even than it's anybody's boots on the ground, because you really think the Russians are going to try to invade Ukraine again and walk over and kill thousands of Americans on their way to Kyiv? It's just not going to happen.
What we've seen, though, is these continued drone strikes and missile launches from Russia, even following the Putin phone call with Trump. So does that tell you that they're targeted strikes, and so maybe these rare earth mineral sites would be off limits, and yet we would still continue to see firing by Russia on Ukraine?
You know, I think these are still, you know, maybe somebody in Russia didn't quite get the message yet, but I do think that these are details. They're big details, but they're details to be worked out. Emma, what I think was so critical with the president's phone call with Putin was they talked about a lot more than just Ukraine. They talked about world peace. They talked about nuclear weapons. And this most significant part of the phone call that they had was that, to quote the White House press release, that both presidents agreed that Iran, remember, Iran wasn't part of these negotiations, that Iran should never have the capability of destroying Israel. Now, what that's code for is that we don't think Iran should have nuclear weapons. If Russia is going to side with us to help President Trump stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, that's the most significant part of this conversation and the whole relationship. Because the real fear, you know, Ukraine will work itself out. That's a European situation. But if Iran gets nuclear weapons, there are nuclear weapons in the hands of the Ayatollahs, who might give them to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. And you would have a nuclear threat in the Middle East and a nuclear arms race in the Middle East with nuclear weapons in the hands of the most ungoverned, unlawful terrorist groups in the world. So if President Trump gets nothing more out of this than an agreement of President Putin to help him stop Iran's nuclear program, that is a hugely significant thing.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.